The hum of the jet's engines was a steady, almost hypnotic backdrop, a sound that usually soothed Adrian Wells. Tonight, it was the anthem of his escape. At 39, the CEO of Wells International was a man accustomed to control, of markets, of boardrooms, and most importantly, of people. In the buttery leather seat across from him, Claudia leaned back, her legs crossed, her silk dress catching the cabin's soft overhead light. She was smiling, that half-smile she used when she wanted him to know she was both amused and slightly dangerous. A game, always a game. Adrian swirled the deep crimson wine in his glass, letting the aroma bloom. "To Milan," he said, raising it in her direction. She tapped her glass against his. "To Milan and to freedom." Freedom. The word lingered between them, heavier than it should have been. Adrian had made sure his phone was switched off before boarding, not just muted but fully powered down. Elena hated when she couldn't reach him. That was exactly the point. He'd told her he'd be at a late dinner with investors, one of those unavoidable obligations. She'd nodded, the way she always did when she didn't believe him, but had stopped asking questions. He told himself that was her choice. Did this story leave an impact? Please like, share, and comment your location. We'd love to know. Claudia leaned forward, her perfume drifting toward him like a warm tide. "You look lighter tonight," she said, brushing her fingertips along the rim of her glass. "I am," Adrian replied. "No shareholders, no analysts, no wife. Just us." Her laugh was soft, but it had an edge, and a flight attendant whose sip's been gone an awfully long time. He glanced toward the narrow galley at the rear of the cabin. She was right. Leila, the attendant, had disappeared after topping off their drinks. But it was nothing, he told himself. Probably restocking the cart or checking the cockpit. Still, the moment hung. He shifted, pouring himself another measure of wine. The velvety liquid caught the light as it filled the glass, the reflection a deep, almost black sheen. He liked the taste, but more than that, he liked the way it looked. Expensive, rich, perfectly under his control. The cabin was warm, almost too warm, the kind of comfort tailored for billionaires who wanted to forget they were 30,000 feet above a sleeping world. Outside, the night stretched endless and silent, the occasional flash of distant lightning illuminating the horizon. Claudia tilted her head. "You ever wonder if someone sits following you, watching?" He smirked. "In my world, people are always watching. The trick is to make sure they see what you want them to see." She studied him for a moment, as if searching for a crack in the armor. "And Elena, what does she see?" He took a slow sip before answering. "What she sits allowed to." The wine slid over his tongue, warm and indulgent, but there was a sharpness to the aftertaste tonight, something he couldn't name. Or maybe it wasn't the wine. Maybe it was the empty galley. 5 more minutes passed. Still no sign of Lila. Adrian set his glass down. "Strange," he murmured. Claudia glanced over her shoulder. "Should I be worried?" "No," he said quickly, though the word felt more like a command than reassurance. It's fine, just a little turbulence in the service department." But as he leaned back, a faint unease threaded through his chest. It wasn't about Lila, not entirely. It was the way the air in the cabin suddenly felt charged, as if someone had opened a door he hadn't noticed before. From somewhere behind the closed galley curtain, there was the faint sound of a hinge creaking. Footsteps followed, slow, deliberate, not the quick, professional stride of a flight attendant. Adrian's gaze flicked to Claudia, who raised an eyebrow. "You expecting company?" she asked, her voice low. He almost laughed, but the sound never came. The curtain shifted, and in that brief, suspended heartbeat before it opened, Adrian realized something he hadn't in years. He wasn't in control anymore. The curtain parted. Leila emerged first, her professional smile fixed but thinner than before. She stepped aside, and from behind her, Elena Wells appeared, poised, composed, and utterly out of place on a flight. Adrian thought was his secret. She wore a tailored navy dress that fit her like a memory he hadn't wanted to revisit. Her dark hair swept into a low chignon. Pearls rested against her collarbone, the kind he once said made her look like she was born into power. Her heels clicked once on the carpeted aisle, then stopped. Her gaze swept the cabin, the polished wood, the soft leather seats, the half-empty bottle of wine. Then her eyes found Claudia. Not Adrian, Claudia. For a moment, no one spoke. The hum of the engines filled the space between them, like a warning. Elena, Adrian said finally, his voice catching on the second syllable. What? Don't sit, get up, she interrupted. Her tone quiet but edged with steel. I wouldn't sit, want to disturb your comfort. Claudia straightened in her seat, crossing her legs the other way, the stem of her wineglass trembling just slightly. I wasn't aware we had another passenger, Adrian managed, glancing at Lila as if she might explain this breach in his world. Lila Sip's eyes flickered with something. Guilt, maybe fear, before she stepped back toward the galley. Mrs. Wells joined us during refueling in Paris, she said. She had clearance. Clearance, Adrian repeated, the word tasting foreign in his mouth. He looked at Elena again. You could have called. And interrupt? She moved down the aisle slowly, her hand grazing the seat backs, her eyes never leaving Claudia. No, I thought I sipped tea for myself. The overhead light caught the facets of her wedding ring, a reminder that no matter how far he flew, there were still things tethering him. She stopped at the table between them, glancing down at the wine bottle. Cabernet, she murmured. 2005. You saved this for special occasions. Claudia looked between them. I think maybe I should. Stay, Elena said, without raising her voice. Please, I insist. The please was almost tender, but her eyes told another story. Adrian shifted in his seat, resting one arm on the table as if to reclaim some control. This isn't set how you think it looks. Oh, I think it sits exactly how it looks, Elena said. She picked up the empty glass from the seat beside her, turning it in her hand. I just never imagined I see it at 30,000 feet. The engines roared louder for a moment, a swell that seemed to press the walls in. Claudia stared down at her own glass, the ruby liquid trembling inside. Elena set the empty glass down deliberately and took a seat across from them. The air shifted, the cabin felt smaller now, as though the three of them were sealed inside something more dangerous than a jet. Go on, Elena said, folding her hands neatly. Don't fit to let me interrupt your evening. But no one reached for their glasses. From the galley the faint click of a latch sounded. Lila was gone again, leaving them without a buffer. Adrian leaned forward slightly. If you came here to make a scene, I came here, Elena said, to have the truth served while it sits still warm. Her gaze returned to Claudia's wineglass, and for a fleeting second the younger woman set it down as if it had grown heavier. The jet sliced through the night, but inside, no one moved. It was only the beginning, and all three of them seemed to understand it, though none more than Elena. Elena didn't rush her movements. She eased into the seat, her back straight, knees together, hands resting lightly in her lap, the posture of someone raised to play by rules she no longer respected. The cabin light haloed her face, softening the sharpness of her cheekbones, but not the cold calculation in her eyes. The leather was warm beneath her, faintly scented with the cologne. Adrian favored. She could still remember when that scent meant safety, not strategy. Adrian cleared his throat. If you sit here for a reason, Elena. I'm here because I've been invisible long enough, she said, voice low, almost conversational. The glass in his hand tilted slightly. He took another sip, and she watched the motion with the kind of attention other women gave to wedding vows. Every swallow was a private admission. Her mind wandered, not to the night before or the last week, but to the months, the years, when his love had been rationed like a luxury item. She remembered dinners where his eyes never left his phone, anniversaries where he forgot the reservation, and long, slow Sundays where silence was both weapon and shield. He had trained her to question herself. Gaslighting, she later learned, had a textbook definition. At the time, it had simply been her marriage. Claudia shifted in her seat, glancing from one to the other, like someone realizing they'd stepped into a play without knowing the script. You always did prefer control over conversation, Elena said. I don't know what you think you're implying, Adrian replied. Leaning back. You don't stet? She tilted her head slightly. Then let me clarify. Every time you take a sip of that wine, you sipper confirming everything I sipper suspected for years. He gave a short laugh. This is absurd. Absurd is hiding your trips to Paris. Absurd is erasing calls from your phone log before you come home. Absurd is building an empire and thinking it makes you untouchable in your own house. Claudia Seps's eyes widened. Adrian, maybe we should... No, Elena said, her gaze flicking briefly to the younger woman. Stay. You deserve to hear this too. After all, he's Seps good at making promises he doesn't intend to keep. The air inside the cabin seemed to thicken. The low hum of the engines pressed against the edges of their silence. Elena reached for the empty glass in front of her. Do you know what this wine reminds me of, Adrian? Our first year together. You opened a bottle just like this on our wedding night. That was different, he said. Yes, she agreed. Back then it didn't taste like poison. She set the glass down deliberately, the sound sharp in the small space. Adrian Sitt's jaw tightened. You think you know me? I do know you, she said. I know your tells, your lies. I know the way you look at a woman. When you sip already decided she sips yours, even if you have to destroy her to prove it. Claudia leaned back, the stem of her glass slipping slightly between her fingers. Maybe I should go. Sit, Adrian ordered, the edge in his voice sharper now. Elena smiled faintly at that, the kind of smile that wasn't set warmth but warning. Still giving orders, still pretending you set the captain of every ship you board. Outside, lightning flickered faintly against the clouds, a flash that lit the cabin in cold, sudden white. In that brief light, Adrian's eyes looked darker, less certain. Elena folded her hands again. Drink up, Adrian. The night Sep's still young. He stared at her, but for the first time, she noticed his fingers were tight around the glass, the knuckles pale. The hum of the engines carried them forward, but Elena felt the descent beginning, not the physical one, but the kind that ended marriages and reputations. And she had no intention of letting him land softly. The wine sat untouched now. Adrian's glass rested on the table, his fingers drumming against the stem in a rhythm too deliberate to be casual. Elena leaned back slightly, her gaze steady, her tone deceptively light. So she began, how was Zurich? Adrian blinked. Zurich? Yes, she said, her lips curving faintly. The conference you attended 2 months ago, the one where your keynote speech was mysteriously absent from the industry newsletter. He gave a thin smile. I spoke at a closed session, confidential. Elena tilted her head. Closed to reporters, or to wives. Claudia shifted in her seat, her eyes darting between them. The younger woman's shoulders were tense now, her earlier composure fraying. Elena didn't wait for a reply. And Paris, tell me, how long was the Theboard meeting set you attended at the Hotel Beaumont? 3 hours, or was it the full weekend? Adrian Sepp's jaw tightened. What exactly are you trying to do here? I am trying to remember my marriage, Elena said evenly. And sometimes the best way to remember is to ask the questions I should have asked sooner. The hum of the engine seemed louder now, pressing against the silence that followed. Outside the windows, clouds shifted in thick, pale layers, occasionally lit by distant lightning. Claudia Simpson's voice was quiet when it came. You never told me you were married. Adrian shot her a look sharp enough to cut. This isn't set the time. No, Elena said softly. It sits exactly the time. Her eyes stayed on Adrian, but her words were angled for Claudia. Did he tell you about the trip to New York? The one where he stayed an extra 2 days because of weather delays? Sits. Claudia Sitt's brow furrowed. He said, Let me guess, Elena interrupted. He said the airport was closed. Strange, because I checked the flights that day. Not a single one was cancelled. The cabin seemed smaller, the air heavier. Even the faint scent of wine now felt cloying, suffocating. Adrian exhaled through his nose. You sit trying to humiliate me. No, Elena said, her voice calm but razor-sharp. I sit from giving you the courtesy of hearing the truth before someone else delivers it to you, less gently. Claudia Sitt's glass wavered in her hand. What truth? Adrian's eyes flicked to her, but he didn't answer. That silence said more than any denial could. The jet jolted slightly, a brief turbulence that made the wine in Claudia's glass tremble. Elena's gaze didn't waver. "Tell her," she said. "Enough," Adrian snapped. The turbulence passed, but its echo lingered in the tightening of Claudia's grip on the armrest. She was beginning to see it. The cracks, the shadows behind his charm, the way his authority had limits he was desperate to hide. Elena reached for her own empty glass, turning it slowly in her hands. "You, sir, built an empire on other people's trust, Adrian. Investors, partners, your wife." She let the last word hang in the air. "The problem is, once trust breaks, the fall is quick and loud." For the first time that night, Adrian didn't meet her eyes. Elena set the glass down, aligning it precisely with the edge of the table. The gesture was small, but it carried finality. Outside, the clouds thinned, revealing a scatter of city lights far below. They were descending, but the true drop hadn't even started. And Elena knew exactly when it would. The seatbelt sign chimed softly, and Lila's voice came over the intercom, asking all passengers to remain seated while the pilots adjusted for a patch of turbulence ahead. Adrian muttered something about checking the cockpit, unbuckled, and disappeared toward the front. Claudia stayed rigid in her seat, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the window, as if the clouds might offer an escape. Elena waited. She had learned the art of patience long before this flight, in whispered arguments behind closed doors, in the quiet aftermath of his betrayals. When she finally stood, it was with the grace of someone going to the restroom. Her steps were silent on the plush carpet. She moved toward the rear of the cabin, past the galley, where Lila busied herself re-securing service trays. A narrow door sat flush with the wall. Unremarkable, except for the polished brass lock Adrian always kept shut. The key wasn't far. She knew him too well. In the inner pocket of his suit jacket, hung neatly on the cabin's coat hook, she found the slim metal piece. The weight of it in her palm was cold, almost metallic reassurance. She glanced once over her shoulder. No one was watching. The lock clicked open with a softness that felt almost like permission. Inside, the compartment smelled faintly of cedar and leather. At first glance, it looked like any executive's travel stash, a spare watch, cufflinks, an envelope of euros. But beneath a folded cashmere sweater was a black leather portfolio. She pulled it free, the zipper resisting for just a moment before yielding. The first document she saw was a ledger, not company-issued, but handwritten in Adrian's neat slanted script. Dates, amounts, destinations. Millions shifted quietly into accounts she didn't recognize. Her pulse slowed, not quickened. This was confirmation, not surprise. Underneath were coded printouts, strings of numbers and letters she recognized as banking encryptions. Next came photographs, each one slipped into a plastic sleeve. She slid the first out. A picture of Adrian, standing on a balcony with a man she knew only from news headlines, a politician under investigation for corruption. Another, taken at night, showed him at a table with two strangers, stacks of cash between them. And then, the last photo, one that made her hand still, Claudia. Not here, not on this trip, but months ago, in the lobby of a Paris hotel. Adrian stood beside her, hand on her back, his head turned just enough to suggest intimacy, but not enough to make it obvious to a casual observer. Elena's mind began threading the pieces together. The business trips that weren't, the accounts that never matched, the sudden bursts of unexplained income. It wasn't only infidelity, it was laundering, connections, and if she timed it right, exposure. Her lips pressed into a thin line. This wasn't just about the end of a marriage anymore. This was about leverage. She returned the portfolio exactly as she'd found it, locked the compartment, and slipped the key back into his jacket. By the time Adrian returned from the cockpit, she was seated again, her hands folded neatly, her expression unreadable. "Problem with the flight?" she asked lightly. "Just a minor detour," he said, sliding back into his seat. She offered a polite smile. "Interesting. Detours can be revealing." His brow furrowed slightly, but before he could reply, the cabin dipped gently, the skyline of a distant city winking through the clouds. Elena leaned back, feeling the slow, deliberate shift of the jet as it adjusted its course. She had just done the same with her life, and she already knew exactly where she was steering. Elena sat perfectly still, the hum of the engines becoming a low, steady drumbeat in her ears. Across from her, Adrian poured himself another glass of wine, the movement casual, but she could still feel the weight of the portfolio she'd held minutes ago. She let her gaze drift to the oval window beside her. The night sky outside was ink black, broken only by scattered clusters of city lights far below. Somewhere in that darkness, her mind began to unspool the years. It had started so differently. She remembered the first time she saw him, at a charity gala, surrounded by people who laughed too loudly and watched too closely. Adrian had been magnetic. He'd singled her out from the crowd, drawn her into conversation, made her feel like she was the only person in the room. In those early months, he'd sent flowers to her office, whisked her away for impromptu weekends, spoken of a future that felt certain and glittering. It wasn't love at first sight. It was a seduction in chapters, each one crafted with precision. But charm, she later learned, had an expiration date. The first change was subtle, a suggestion to move into his penthouse because it was closer to work. She'd agreed, not realizing she was leaving behind the small apartment that had been hers alone. Then came the helpful advice to leave her job and focus on managing the household, a phrase that sounded quaint until she understood. It meant dependence. She'd tried to keep friendships alive, but there were always conflicts, dinners she couldn't attend because he needed her for a business event, trips she couldn't take because he was too busy to join. One by one, the people she'd leaned on began to fade from her life. And yet he never raised his voice. That was the brilliance of it. His control wasn't loud, it was quiet, polite, wrapped in silk and gold. It was asking why she needed a credit card in her name when we share everything. It was suggesting she didn't need to stress over legal documents, because I'll handle it. Penny for your thoughts, Adrian said now, breaking into her reverie. She turned her gaze back to him. I was just remembering, she said softly. Good memories, I hope, he replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Some, she said, and some warnings I should have listened to. He smirked, leaning back. You always did overthink. No, Elena said, her tone steady. I just finally started thinking clearly. Claudia shifted uncomfortably, her gaze flicking between them. Elena's mind flicked back to one final flashback, the day she found a set of bank statements tucked into the wrong file. Numbers that didn't match the stories. Transfers to accounts she couldn't trace. She'd asked him about them, and he'd smiled, kissed her hand, and told her she was imagining things. She knew now that she hadn't been imagining anything. She had been standing at the edge of the truth, and he had been shoving her back into the dark. The present came back into focus. She looked at him, glass in hand, pretending nothing was wrong. The man who had once been her entire world was now just a subject in a case she was building in her mind. Her pulse was calm. The decision was already made. From the front of the cabin, Lila's voice announced their expected landing time. Elena caught the faintest shift in Adrian's posture. He was relaxed, confident they'd step off this jet and into his version of reality. But Elena knew the real descent hadn't begun yet, and she was the one holding the controls. The silence after Elena's last words was heavy enough to feel like gravity itself had thickened. Adrian took a long sip of wine, his eyes locked on his wife, as though ignoring Claudia would make her disappear. But Claudia wasn't disappearing. She was watching. At first, it had been easy to believe she was the chosen one, the exception to whatever rules a man like Adrian lived by. He had been generous, attentive, even romantic in ways that felt rare. Yet tonight, with Elena sitting across from them like a mirror reflecting the parts of him Claudia had never been invited to see, the edges of her belief began to fray. She thought about the trip to Paris, when Adrian had told her he was in negotiations all afternoon. She'd stayed in the hotel suite, sipping champagne and waiting for him, But now Elena's earlier words gnawed at her. I checked the flights. Not a single one was cancelled. If he could lie to his wife so effortlessly, why wouldn't he lie to her? Claudia, Adrian said suddenly, his voice sharper than she was used to. Why don't sit you freshen your drink? She glanced at the bottle, still half full, and then at Elena, who was sitting perfectly still, her eyes unreadable. I'm fine, she said. Elena sips, making this into something it starts not. Adrian continued, his tone shifting to the smooth persuasion she recognized from the early days. You know how people can exaggerate when they sip or hurt. Claudia Sitt's gaze narrowed slightly. And what exactly is exaggerated? That you lied, or that you were in Paris with me when your wife thought you were working? Adrian Sepp's expression hardened. I don't that answer to. Apparently you don't answer to anyone, Elena said quietly, cutting him off without raising her voice. The engines droned on, steady and indifferent, but inside the cabin the air was tight, almost electric. Claudia felt her pulse quicken, not from fear, but from the sudden awareness that she'd never really been in control of her place in Adrian's life. She remembered the necklace he'd given her in Rome, claiming it was one of a kind. A month later, she'd seen a photo of Elena at a gala wearing the same design. At the time, Adrian had laughed it off, said it was a coincidence. Now she wondered if it had been a deliberate choice, a quiet way of binding them both to the same unspoken game. Claudia, Elena said gently, you know he Sepp's not loyal to anyone. You Sepp felt it? Haven't set you. The way he makes you depend on him, just enough to think you Sepp's safe. Claudia swallowed, her throat tight. I don't. She trailed off, realizing she didn't have the right words. Adrian leaned forward, his voice low, urgent. She sits trying to turn you against me. Don't let her. But the more he spoke, the more Claudia heard the same polished cadence she'd once mistaken for sincerity. And now, sitting between his wife and the truth, she wasn't sure who the real threat was. Elena didn't press further. She didn't need to. The seed was planted, and she could see it in the way Claudia's gaze kept drifting away from Adrian's, as if searching for an escape route she didn't yet have. From the cockpit, the Captain Sipp's voice broke the tension. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall be beginning our descent shortly. The city lights were closer now, glittering through the darkness like a promise and a warning all at once. Elena sat back, her expression calm. Claudia's glass trembled slightly in her hand. And Adrian didn't seem to notice that for the first time all night he was no longer the center of the room's attention. The captain's voice faded, leaving only the steady hum of the engines and the faint rustle of air through the vents. The private jet tilted slightly, beginning its slow, deliberate descent. Elena's gaze stayed fixed on the dark horizon beyond the window, her reflection faint in the glass. Behind that composed exterior, her mind moved quickly, slotting every detail from the locked compartment into a clear, unshakable plan. While Adrian was leaning toward Claudia, trying to smooth over the cracks that had formed in her loyalty, Elena reached down into her handbag, her fingers brushing the slim black phone she'd hidden there. She'd turned off the screen hours ago to avoid suspicion, but now, shielding the device from view with the fold of her coat, she woke it with a tap. Her thumb hovered for only a second before pressing the single number she'd memorized. The line connected almost instantly. Detective Harris, came the calm, clipped voice on the other end. It's Elena Wells, she said quietly, keeping her tone neutral. I'm on Adrian's jet. We're 30 minutes out from Milan. Flight number. She rattled off the details, her eyes still fixed on the window. The files you've been looking for. I have confirmation. Offshore accounts. Political connections. Photographs. Harris's voice remained steady, but there was a new edge beneath it. And your safety? I'm fine, she said, though she could feel the heat of Adrian Sipp's presence across the table. I'll be even better when you sipped her waiting on the runway. Copy that. We shall be there. She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her bag in one smooth motion. When she looked up, Adrian's eyes were on her. Who was that? He asked, his tone deceptively light. Just checking in with the hotel, she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. His smile was small and tight. Making sure your suite has the right view. Yes, she said evenly. I've always preferred to see the whole city from above. Claudia looked between them, sensing something but not understanding it fully. We're staying in the same place? She asked, her voice uncertain. Adrian didn't answer. Instead, he poured himself more wine, the liquid glinting in the cabin light. But Elena noticed his hand wasn't as steady as before. The city lights below grew sharper, clusters of gold and white threading through the blackness. The descent was smooth, but inside the cabin, the air was shifting, invisible currents of tension weaving tighter with every passing second. Adrian leaned forward, lowering his voice. If you think whatever game you set playing is going to work, you set wrong. Elena held his gaze. It's not a game, Adrian. Games end when someone wins. This is about ending something altogether. Claudia Sip's brow furrowed. Ending what? Adrian shot her a warning look, but Elena Sip's answer was soft, almost kind. The illusion. The hum of the engines deepened as the jet adjusted its angle for landing. The seatbelt light flicked on. Lila reappeared from the galley, her expression unreadable. We'll be touching down in approximately 20 minutes, she said, moving to secure the cabin. Elena fastened her belt, her fingers steady. Adrian did the same, his jaw tight. He didn't know exactly what she'd done, but she could see the flicker of unease behind his eyes, the faint recognition that control, his favorite currency, was slipping through his hands. The jet's nose dipped further, the runway lights just beginning to appear in the distance. Elena let her gaze drift forward, past Adrian, past the polished mahogany paneling of the cabin, to that thin strip of illuminated ground. She wasn't landing, she was delivering. And in 20 minutes the real turbulence would begin. The jet's wheels kissed the runway with a muted thud, the reverse thrusters roaring briefly before settling into the steady hum of taxiing. Through the oval windows, the glow of the terminal lights swept past in long, fluid streaks. Adrian leaned back, his usual post-landing composure intact, or so it appeared. Only the faint tension in his jaw betrayed the unease he was trying to bury. Elena sat across from him, her seatbelt still buckled, her gaze fixed out the window as if she hadn't noticed the line of dark, motionless vehicles ahead. The jet slowed, too soon, too sharply. Claudia frowned, glancing toward the window. Why are we stopping here? No one answered. Then came the flash of blue and red lights, muted by the glass, but unmistakable in their rhythm. 4 police SUVs flanked the aircraft, their doors opening in near-perfect unison. Figures in dark uniforms stepped out, moving with the precision of people who had done this before. Adrian Sep's head snapped toward Elena. What did you do? She didn't look at him. I told you, she said softly. I don't play games. The cabin door opened with a hiss of pressure, and 2 officers stepped inside. Their presence filled the narrow space, the scent of night air and leather drifting in with them. Adrian Wells, the taller officer, asked. Adrian stood, his voice crisp, controlled. Yes, what's the meaning of? You sit her under arrest for financial fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit bribery, the officer recited. You have the right to remain silent. This is ridiculous, Adrian snapped, his voice rising. I'm a CEO. I have diplomatic... You have the right to remain silent, the officer repeated, unfazed. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Claudia Sips's eyes darted between them, confusion and disbelief colliding in her expression. This can to be real. Oh, it's such real, Elena said quietly, finally meeting her gaze. Every meeting, every trip, every lie. Adrian turned on her, fury burning through his carefully maintained calm. You think you can destroy me? Elena Sips's lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. I didn't destroy you, Adrian. You did that yourself. I just made sure there were witnesses. The officers moved in, securing Adrian's wrists in polished steel. He didn't resist, but his glare never left Elena's face. You so regret this, he said. Maybe, she replied, but at least I shall be free when I do. Claudia sat frozen, her wine glass still in her hand, though the liquid inside trembled. She understood now. The deliberate questions, the way Elena had appeared on this flight like a ghost with perfect timing. None of it had been chance. As the officers guided Adrian toward the door, he glanced back once, his polished exterior finally cracked enough to show the raw panic beneath. Elena didn't move, didn't speak, just watched him disappear into the night air. Outside, the rotating lights painted the tarmac in shifting blue and red. The sound of a car door slamming carried faintly into the cabin. Claudia exhaled, setting her glass down on the table with a soft clink. You planned all of this? Elena looked at her for a long moment. No, she said. I prepared for it. The planning was his. The engines idled, the cabin now eerily still. From somewhere in the distance, the faint whir of approaching media vans broke the silence. Elena unbuckled her seatbelt, her movements calm and deliberate. Come on, she said, standing. It's time to step off this plane. The rain tapped steadily against the tall windows of Rosen & Hale LLP, a soft, unbroken rhythm that muted the city's noise beyond. Weeks had passed since the night on the runway, but the memory of blue and red lights still flashed in Elena's mind whenever she closed her eyes. She sat at the end of a long walnut conference table, the air scented faintly of leather and polished wood. Across from her, Meredith Hale, her attorney, slid the final set of documents forward. The top page bore two names in black ink, Adrian Wells and Elena Wells. This is it, Meredith said, her tone measured but warm. Once you sign, the settlement terms are binding. You'll have full ownership of the penthouse, the vineyard estate in Umbria, and the art holdings. Offshore accounts will be frozen pending the investigation. His shares in Wells International are being transferred to a holding trust in your name until the courts rule otherwise. Elena scanned the pages, though she already memorized every clause. And the confidentiality terms? Meredith Sitt's lips curved slightly. We agreed to them for your privacy, not his. The investigation is public record. Sitt will be living under a microscope for years. Elena nodded, sliding the pen between her fingers. For a moment she hesitated, not out of doubt, but to feel the weight of the decision one last time. Signing would end the marriage on paper, but in truth, it had been ending for years. She lowered the pen to the page. The ink flowed in a smooth arc, her name appearing in the space where his had already been scrawled in bold, impatient strokes. Congratulations, Meredith said softly. Elena set the pen down, exhaling slowly. Not congratulations, she replied. Closure. The rain's rhythm grew louder against the glass, a steady percussion to the moment's stillness. She thought of the woman she had been when she first met Adrian. Eager, trusting, unarmored. That woman would have mistaken this day for a tragedy. But Elena knew better now. This was survival. Meredith gathered the documents into a neat stack. The assets will be transferred within the week. I shall keep you updated on any developments in the criminal case. Elena rose, smoothing the sleeves of her navy coat. Thank you, Meredith, for everything. You did the hard part, Meredith replied.
You walked away.
The office was quiet as Elena stepped into the hallway, the muted lighting casting warm gold against the dark carpet. At the far end, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. As she descended, the city came back into view. Through the elevator's glass wall, wet streets reflecting streaks of light, people moving quickly under umbrellas. Life was going on, indifferent to the fact that hers had just shifted on its axis. The doors opened onto the lobby, where the scent of rain mixed with the faint aroma of coffee from the cafe across the street. Elena paused at the glass entrance, watching the steady drizzle. Her phone buzzed. A news alert. Adrian Wells refuses plea deal in international fraud case. She read the headline twice, her lips pressing into a faint, private smile. Pocketing the phone, she stepped outside into the rain without opening her umbrella. The cool drops touched her skin like punctuation marks, each one sealing the truth of the moment. The marriage was over. The control was gone. The shadow he had cast over her life was finally lifting. And ahead of her, somewhere in the gray haze of the city, waited the quiet, unclaimed space where freedom began. The rooftop bar was quiet at this hour, the hum of the city softened by distance and height. A cool breeze carried the scent of rain that had passed earlier in the evening, leaving the air clean and sharp. Elena sat at a corner table by the glass railing, her coat draped over the back of the chair. In front of her, a tall glass of deep red wine caught the glow of the bar's warm lighting. The skyline stretched before her in a tapestry of glittering windows and slow-moving lights, each building standing like a silent witness to the months that had reshaped her life. She swirled the wine gently, watching the legs run down the glass. It was a 2005 Cabernet, the same year, the same label Adrian had once reserved for special occasions. Back then, each pour had felt like a stage prop, part of the performance of a life that wasn't entirely hers. Now it was hers alone. A waiter passed, pausing briefly. "Another glass?" "Not yet," she said, smiling faintly. "I stepped, still enjoying this one." He nodded and moved on, leaving her with the quiet hum of background jazz and the soft clink of glassware from the bar. She took a slow sip. The flavor was rich, layered, nothing like the sharp bitterness she'd tasted on the jet that night. She realized she wasn't drinking to dull her senses or to fill the silence anymore. She was drinking because she could, because the moment itself was worth savoring. Her phone buzzed once in her bag, but she didn't reach for it. The world could wait. She thought of the months since the divorce, the sale of Adrian's properties to cover legal fees, the headlines that grew smaller each week, until they vanished from the front page entirely. She thought of the vineyard in Umbria, waiting for her next visit, and the art she'd chosen to keep, pieces that now hung in her own home, without the weight of someone else's ownership. There was no triumph in these thoughts, only quiet acknowledgement. Freedom, she'd learned, wasn't loud. It didn't demand a toast or a speech. It arrived like a slow sunrise, unnoticed at first, then impossible to ignore. She set the glass down, resting her hands lightly on the table. Across the rooftop, a couple laughed softly, leaning close over their shared dessert. She didn't feel the pang of envy she might have once. Their story was theirs, hers was hers. The city lights blinked below, steady and unhurried. Elena reached for her glass again, tilting it toward the skyline in a silent, private salute. "To peace," she whispered to herself. The wine touched her lips, warm and smooth, and for the first time in years it tasted exactly as it should, without regret, without pretense. Just wine. Just her. And that was enough.
The airport buzzed with late-morning chaos. Rolling suitcases, flight announcements echoing overhead, designer heels clicking over polished marble. Michael adjusted his cufflinks with one hand, effortlessly guiding a Louis Vuitton carry-on. With the other, he looked every bit the man in control. Expensive watch, tailored suit, cool detachment. Vanessa trailed beside him, long legs and longer hair, her soft pink cashmere coat swaying with each step. "Michael, I still can't believe. You surprised me with Milan," she purred, linking her arm through his. He smiled, the kind that never quite reached his eyes. "You deserve it." They stopped near gate A17. Vanessa fished for her lip gloss. Michael retrieved her handbag without question. He didn't mind playing the part. Chivalry looked good on him. Until, Mommy, if this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and like, spread the word, and tell us where you're watching from. A voice, high-pitched and urgent, sliced through the sterile calm. Michael froze mid-motion. A small blur shot past him. Tangled curls, little red sneakers, arms flung wide. The girl couldn't have been older than 6. She sprinted through the crowd like the world had narrowed to one target. "Camille," she stood, by the arrivals board, wearing a red coat that looked too familiar. Her posture was stiff, like she hadn't planned for this. Hadn't prepared to be seen. Michael's breath caught in his throat. Lila barreled into Camille's legs, nearly knocking her over. Camille gasped, more from shock than impact, and knelt instinctively, catching the girl in a trembling embrace. Michael took a step forward. "Lila," he whispered. Vanessa turned. "Wait, did that kid just call her Mommy?" Camille looked up, her eyes locked with Michael's. Cold, clear, devastating that he hadn't seen her in 2 years. Not since the divorce. Not since the custody battle he won with tactics he convinced himself were justified. Lila giggled, tugging Camille's curls. You came back. Camille didn't answer. Her hand gently brushed Lila's cheek, but her gaze never left Michael. There was no screaming, no drama, just unbearable silence thick with memory and unfinished wars. Vanessa stepped closer, confused. Michael, who is that? His jaw clenched. That's Camille. Your ex-wife. Camille slowly rose to her feet, still holding Lila's hand. You didn't think we'd run into each other, did you? She said softly, eyes flicking to Vanessa, then back to Michael. I guess airports really are where people arrive, and the truth lands too. Lila looked between them, sensing something she didn't understand but felt in her bones. Michael forced a smile. Camille, this isn't the time. But Camille was already walking away, Lila's hand tight in hers. Vanessa stood frozen, her lip gloss forgotten. Watching the past walk away with the future, Michael didn't move. Couldn't. He was still, holding Vanessa's bag, but something heavier had dropped inside him. And just like that, the gate had closed. Camille sat on the courtroom bench, hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles ached. The mahogany-paneled walls closed in around her like a confession booth she never volunteered to enter. Michael sat across the aisle, legs casually crossed, whispering something to his lawyer that made him smirk. His cufflinks glinted under the fluorescent lights. He looked like he'd already won. And in truth, he had. The custody agreement lay open in front of her, a polished document dressed in legalese and cruelty. One clause was underlined in red by her own lawyer's pen. Clause 12. See, the mother agrees to abstain from unsupervised or spontaneous public contact with the child without prior written consent from the father. Camille stared at it, the words smearing as her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Don't sign this. Her lawyer, Helen, whispered urgently. Camille, this clause is a trap. It's control disguised as caution. You'll never see Lila without his permission. But if I don't sign, Camille murmured, her voice hollow, he'll drag this for months. He'll say I'm unstable. He already told the court I had postpartum delusions. Helen exhaled. You were grieving. You weren't delusional. He's weaponizing your pain. Camille's hands shook as she signed. Not because she agreed, but because she was exhausted. And Michael knew it. He'd timed the assault perfectly. A month after her mother's funeral, a week into Camille's new medication, he was always strategic. Now, 2 years later, standing in the airport terminal with Lila's small hand wrapped in hers, Camille could feel the ink of that clause still wet on her skin. She hadn't seen her daughter in person since the court's final ruling. Every call had been filtered through Michael. Every birthday recorded in brief, sterilized videos. But Lila running to her today, in public, unplanned, had changed something. Vanessa hadn't known who Camille was. Lila had. And that terrified Michael. She could see it on his face. That twitch in his jaw. The panic behind his eyes. He wasn't scared Camille had broken the clause. He was scared the truth had. She hadn't approached Lila. She hadn't spoken first. The court wouldn't care. But the truth did. Inside her chest, something stirred. Not rage, not vengeance, but clarity. He hadn't just tried to erase her from her daughter's life. He'd done it with surgical precision, and the world applauded because he wore a tie and she wore grief. Camille knelt in front of Lila again, smoothing the child's curls. You're taller than I remember, she whispered, heart cracking as she said it. Lila giggled. I drink milk now. Michael moved toward them, fast. Camille, this is not the time or place. She stood, slowly. According to the clause, I'm not allowed to make contact unless you approve. But I didn't make contact, Michael. Vanessa stood nearby, brows furrowed. What clause? Michael's silence was its own confession. Camille turned to walk away with Lila, just as security guards glanced over, unsure of the tension but unwilling to interfere. She stopped, looked back. You want to own the narrative, Michael? Go ahead. But don't be shocked if your daughter keeps rewriting it. As they disappeared into the crowd, Michael's grip tightened on Vanessa's hand. The only thing he could still control, but in his other hand. The weight of Camille's words burned like truth. Michael stood motionless in the middle of the terminal, watching Camille disappear into the crowd with Lila. His pulse thudded in his neck. Vanessa tugged on his sleeve, lips parted, eyes sharp with confusion. Michael, she said, voice low but cutting. Who was that woman? He inhaled, but the lie stalled in his throat. My ex-wife, he finally muttered, eyes still fixed on the spot where Camille had vanished. Vanessa blinked. The one you said was gone? The unstable one. Michael didn't answer. Instead, his eyes fell to the red coat Camille had been wearing. Familiar. But not just familiar, it was hers. The one he had bought years ago in Paris, when Camille was pregnant with Lila and craving brightness in the middle of a gray winter. The exact coat Vanessa had posted about once. A blurry Instagram post from 3 years ago. Caption, Vintage Dreams. Still smells like someone else's perfume. Camille had found the post, of course. Quietly. Alone. In the dark, 1 month after the divorce papers arrived, while nursing herself out of a fog that she'd zoomed in. Recognized. The stitching. The tiny pinprick where her brooch used to rest. She hadn't said a word back then. Just pressed her phone to her chest and let the silence confirm what her gut had already told her. That Michael hadn't waited. That while she lay numb in a postpartum ward, doubting her own worth, he'd been in hotel rooms with the woman now standing beside him. Back in the terminal, Vanessa watched Michael closely. You gave her my coat, she asked. Michael looked at her, startled. What? That coat she was wearing. It looked like the one I had. He hesitated. It was yours. I mean, it was hers first. I thought it didn't matter. Vanessa took a small step back, her expression folding inward. You said she was in a clinic. That she walked out on you and Lila. Michael's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Vanessa's voice cracked. You said she was broken. But that didn't look like a broken woman. That looked like someone who knew something. Michael's phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from his assistant. He ignored it. Vanessa's gaze lingered on where Camille had stood, still trying to stitch together what had just happened, not just at Gate A17, but across years of deception. The weight of betrayal was shifting now, no longer just Camille's burden. She wore it on purpose, Vanessa said quietly. She wanted me to see it, didn't she? Michael didn't respond. He just picked up the bag he had dropped when Lila screamed, Mommy, Vanessa's sleek white tote, and handed it back to her without a word. But she didn't take it. Instead, Vanessa turned and began walking toward the exit, slow and stunned, her heels echoing against the terminal floor. Michael didn't follow. He was still watching the crowd, still seeing red. Not the coat, not the woman, but the warning. The cold white walls of Dr. Adler's office were too smooth, too quiet, the kind of silence that didn't comfort, only reminded Camille how empty everything had become. She sat stiffly in the leather chair, knees pressed together, fingers clutching the frayed edge of her sweater like it was a lifeline. I don't feel crazy, she whispered. But maybe that's what crazy people say. Dr. Adler didn't flinch, just folded her hands and waited. Camille stared at the rug. I mean, her voice cracked. How do you prove you're sane when everyone is invested in believing you're not? It had been 4 months since the custody hearing. 4 months since Michael stood in court with a thick folder of therapy reports, half-truths, and hand-picked text messages that told a damning story. Camille had been grieving, yes. Exhausted. Numb. But dangerous? Unfit? She hadn't even known he'd been documenting her behavior. The phrase postpartum psychosis had come up once in passing, twisted later into a weapon. Michael, the concerned husband. Michael, the wounded father he'd always known how to perform. Now, she sat in therapy not because she was broken, but because she needed the paper trail that proved she wasn't. Camille began keeping journals. Discreetly. Not just the spiral-bound ones, but digital copies hidden under innocuous file names. Notes about Michael's controlling patterns. Screenshots of missed call logs. Messages never delivered. Birthdays spent alone. She gathered receipts. Not revenge. She built a record. Not to destroy him, but to survive him. Still, the loneliness was a suffocating thing. One rainy Tuesday, she walked into a women's support group in the basement of a church. The folding chairs were arranged in a tight, tired circle. She didn't speak for 3 sessions. Just listened to stories of lost custody, legal gaslighting, the weaponization of motherhood. It wasn't until someone said, he told the court I was dangerous for crying too much, that Camille cried too, silently, hands folded, mascara running, breath shallow. Outside, the thunder rolled. Inside, something began to rise in her. Not rage, not yet, but resistance. Michael had painted her as an unstable shadow. But shadows only fall where there's light. Back at home, she printed out every copy of her therapy reports. All glowing, all consistent. No erratic behavior, no clinical diagnosis. And still, she was kept from Lila.in court. Michael had argued that Camille showing up unannounced might confuse the child. He claimed Lila no longer asked about her, that she was adjusting beautifully. But Camille knew better. On Lila's 6th birthday, Camille mailed a handmade card, a drawing of 2 hands holding, traced in red crayon. It was returned unopened. She didn't cry that time. She documented it. There were nights when she stared at the ceiling, wondering if she'd ever be allowed to simply be Lila's mother again. But she never stopped writing, never stopped collecting. Every lie Michael had told, to lawyers, to therapists, to the court, she was stacking like bricks, not to bury him, but to build her way back. The lounge was quieter now. Businessmen scrolling through emails, soft jazz humming beneath the muted airport announcements. Camille sat near the window, a cup of tea in hand, steam rising to meet her face. She wasn't hiding, but she wasn't quite visible either. Across the room, Vanessa laughed. Too loudly. She tossed her hair back, flashing a glimmering diamond ring on her hand as she reached for her espresso. The stone caught the sunlight just right, and Camille's breath caught with it. She knew that ring. Not the setting, exactly. Not the band, but the stone, the marquise-cut diamond. The way it was slightly tilted. It had taken Camille 2 weeks to choose that design when she was 27 and foolish enough to believe permanence came in carats. Michael had always said, "This stone has character. Like you." Now, it sparkled on someone else's finger. Camille's lips barely moved, but inside, her thoughts screamed. He didn't even change it. Not really. He just rewrapped the lie and handed it to the next one as she lifted her cup slowly, angling her phone just enough beneath the rim. Camera app open. She tapped record with a steady thumb, pretending to sip. On screen, the ring danced in the frame. Vanessa played with her hair, twirling it, laughing again, oblivious. Michael wasn't smiling. He'd seen Camille notice, and he noticed her noticing. Their eyes met. Briefly, but it was enough that he stood and excused himself from Vanessa with a casual gesture, walking toward the hallway near the private lounge restrooms. Not a word, not a wave, just a silent demand. Camille hesitated, then followed. Inside the corridor, muted by soundproofed walls, he turned. "You've made your point," he said. Quiet. Cold. Camille raised an eyebrow. "I haven't even spoken." He glanced toward her phone. "Recording me now? You think that'll help you?" "No," she replied, pocketing it. "I think it helps me. Helps me remember I'm not crazy. That what happened wasn't just a feeling. It was real." Michael crossed his arms. "You're digging." Again. She stepped closer. Calm. Controlled. "You recycled the ring, Michael." His face flickered, just for a second. She went on. "The coat. The ring. The same lies, just new packaging. You didn't replace me. You copied me." "That's not true," he snapped. She tilted her head. "Isn't it?" The hallway stretched between them like a quarter mile. "You won custody by calling me unstable. But tell me, how stable is a man who keeps repeating his past and calling it new?" He didn't answer. Camille turned to leave, pausing only. "Once, by the way," she said over her shoulder, "you might want to tell Vanessa who designed her ring. She deserves at least one original thing in her life." She returned to the lounge. Vanessa was still scrolling her phone, probably posting another filtered selfie, the ring front and center. Camille picked up her tea. Her hands no longer shook. She had no interest in revenge. But truth was patient. And she was learning to be, too. The terminal had calmed, the buzz of flights departing in the background. Camille remained seated in the corner of the lounge, her tea long gone cold. Across the concourse, Vanessa and Michael were gathered near a cafe, distracted in their own strained conversation. Lila stood between them, small fingers tugging at the hem of Vanessa's sweater, eyes darting around curiously. She wasn't looking at the croissants or the glowing departure board. She was searching. Camille felt it before it happened, a strange stillness, the pause before a storm. Lila's head turned sharply. Her eyes found Camille. Recognition bloomed in her face, unsure but instinctual. And then she ran. Camille's heart seized as the little girl broke into a sprint across the terminal tiles, her curls bouncing with each step, her sneakers a blur. Of red, Lila. Vanessa's voice cracked. Wait. Camille stood quickly, not moving forward, but bracing herself. The child skidded to a stop in front of her, chest heaving. They stared at each other. Camille knelt, lowering herself slowly. Until they were eye level. Lila tilted her head. Do you know me? Camille's voice trembled. Do you know me? Lila blinked, studying her face with an intensity only children possess. She leaned in slightly. You look like me, she said quietly. But older. Camille smiled, small and aching. Yes, I do. Why? Before Camille could answer, heavy footsteps thundered behind them. Michael T. stormed across the terminal, his face flushed with rage and panic. Lila, he bellowed. Get over here now. The sound sliced through the moment. Lila flinched. Camille straightened. Michael grabbed his daughter's wrist too tightly. Lila whimpered. She came to me. Camille said, her voice calm but steady. You saw that? Michael's jaw clenched. You are violating court orders. Again. I didn't call out to her. He didn't answer. Just yanked Lila's arm and began to pull her away. Lila looked back, tears welling. Why does she look like me? She called out. Camille stood frozen. She didn't chase. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a moment. Then she opened the folder titled Custody Lies. There it all was. Her therapy records, visitation denials, Michael's financial discrepancies, video clips, transcripts, even screenshots of Lila's returned birthday cards. Camille pressed send, addressed to her new attorney, to the State Review Board, and one parenting journalist she trusted. She watched Michael disappear into the terminal with Lila in his grip and Vanessa, trailing awkwardly behind. But for the first time, Camille didn't feel powerless because her daughter had recognized something. Not by name, not by title, but by blood. And blood remembers that IT started with a quiet upload. A grainy video, 15 seconds long. No dramatic angles. No audio. Just a little girl sprinting across an airport terminal into the arms of a woman who looked like her. Caption: Mother denied custody. Child recognizes her anyway. It was posted anonymously to a parenting forum. Then reposted. Then quoted. Then dissected. Within a day, it had 800,000 views. The comments flooded in. Not all kind, but many outraged. How does a court keep a child from a mother she clearly knows? This isn't estrangement. This is erasure. Where is the justice for Camille? Vanessa saw the video on her lunch break, sent to her by a friend with a single question. Is this you and Michael? She watched it on mute at first, mouth dry, then again, with sound. You could hear her voice in the background, faint, confused. Michael's footsteps. The child's laughter. The comment section underneath her latest Instagram post. A filtered photo of her ring with a latte. Exploded. Not with compliments, but with confrontation. Is that the same ring his ex wore? Girl, you're sleeping in another woman's script. Where's Lila's mother? She began deleting them one by one. Then all at once in a downtown cafe that same afternoon. Camille walked beside her lawyer through a quiet park. Her scarf was pulled close, but her chin was lifted. It's not about going viral, she said carefully, watching two kids kick a soccer ball across the grass. It's about visibility. Her lawyer nodded. And visibility is leverage. Camille exhaled. Let him call me crazy now. The whole world's watching. At his office, Michael slammed his laptop shut as another email pinged in. Michael, care to comment on this custody video making rounds on LinkedIn? His PR manager was texting him nonstop. His assistant hesitated when offering him coffee. His board of directors requested a brief conversation. Control, once effortless, was now leaking through the seams of his suit. Vanessa stood in the doorway. You told me she was dangerous, she said flatly that he didn't look up. She is. Vanessa crossed her arms. To who? Michael finally met her eyes. To my reputation. There was no apology in his voice. Only exhaustion. And calculation. Vanessa stared at him like she was seeing him for the first time. She looked like she hadn't been broken, she said. She looked like she'd been buried. Michael didn't respond. He turned to the window, watching the traffic move below. Each car, anonymous, fast, reminded him of how quickly the narrative was slipping from his hands. Later that evening, Camille sat on a park bench, watching her inbox fill with interview requests and messages from mothers she'd never met. Point 1. Read. Thank you for showing that we're not invisible. Another simply said, I see you. She didn't respond to any of them. She just closed her eyes for a moment and let the cold wind sting her cheeks, not in pain, but in proof. She felt alive. The court had once ruled her unfit. But this new court, the court of public memory, of raw footage and emotional truth, was now in session, and it wasn't asking for permission. The courtroom was colder than Vanessa expected, not from temperature, but tone. It echoed with formality and quiet judgment, even before anyone spoke. She sat stiffly in the witness chair, knees tightly crossed, palms sweating against the polished wood. She hadn't dressed for this. She'd worn the same beige blazer she used for gallery openings and ribbon cuttings. It suddenly felt thin, like armor made of paper. Across the room, Camille sat beside her lawyer, posture calm, face unreadable. She didn't glare. She didn't smirk. She simply watched. The judge called the room to order. Camille's lawyer rose. Her voice was cool, clipped. Miss Rutherford, can you confirm the date Mr. Ellison gave you the ring you now wear? Vanessa cleared her throat. 3 years ago, around Christmas. And when did Mr. Ellison's divorce finalize? Vanessa hesitated. I'm not sure of the exact date. The lawyer nodded. Were you aware he was still married when he began your relationship? Vanessa's eyes flicked toward Michael, seated with his legal team. He didn't meet her gaze. No, she said quietly. He told me it was over, that she was unstable, dangerous. And do you still believe that? Silence. Vanessa swallowed. No, I don't. The lawyer laid a document on the table. This is a copy of the therapy evaluations submitted by Mr. Ellison. You'll see no official diagnosis, no medical basis for the court's ruling. The paper landed like a hammer. Vanessa flinched. The questioning ended. She was dismissed. But instead of leaving, she walked past Michael and paused at Camille's table. I didn't know, she whispered. He made it sound like you were something else. Camille studied her face. He needed you to believe that, so you wouldn't look deeper. I didn't want to be the other woman. You weren't, Camille said. Gently. You were the next woman. There's a difference. Vanessa looked away, shame rushing to her cheeks. I didn't expect to end up here. Camille's voice softened. Neither did I. But here we are. There was no gloating in her tone. No venom. Just two women standing on opposite sides of a man who'd kept them both in the dark. Vanessa nodded, blinking quickly, and returned to her seat. Camille exhaled slowly. One war was ending, not with victory, but with clarity. Outside, reporters gathered. Inside, the truth had found oxygen. The rain whispered against the window pane, soft and steady, as if the sky itself were trying not to disturb the silence. Inside the penthouse, Lila sat cross-legged on the living room rug, crayon in hand, a coloring book open but forgotten beside her. Her eyes drifted again to the tall glass doors where her father paced on the phone, voice hushed but tense. No, it's under control. We have the legal paperwork. No comment until our side is reviewed. Michael murmured into the receiver. Lila tilted her head. He'd been talking like that a lot lately, like he was scared, but not of monsters, of something real. Or someone. Earlier that day, at breakfast, she had asked, Daddy, who was that lady at the airport? Michael didn't look up from his tablet. Just someone who thought she knew us. She was confused, honey. But she looked like me, Lila said quietly. She's nobody, he replied, too quickly. You don't need to think about her. Now, alone in the quiet, Lila wandered down the hallway. Her feet pattered across the wood floor until she reached Michael's office. The door was open just a crack, the kind of open that was almost an invitation. Inside, she tugged at the handle of the lower desk drawer. It gave with a soft click. Folders, receipts, a velvet box, and then a photo. It was bent at the edges, slightly faded, but unmistakable. A young woman in a red coat, holding a baby bundled in white, both smiling at the camera. The woman's eyes, they were Lila's eyes. The smile was hers. The dimple, the chin. She stared at it for a long time. The door creaked behind her. Michael stood there, raincoat still on, expression unreadable. Where did you get that? He asked. Lila looked up. Why didn't you tell me? He didn't answer. She's not nobody, Lila said, her voice small but steady. Michael moved to take the photo, but she pulled it close to her chest. She held me. I remember. His jaw twitched. You were just a baby. You don't remember. Anything. Lila shook her head. Sometimes the heart remembers what the law forgets. She walked past him, photo still in hand, her little shoulders set with quiet defiance. Michael didn't stop her, couldn't. He stared at the empty drawer, then at the rain outside, and for the first time, the storm felt deserved. The ballroom shimmered with opulence, chandeliers dripping crystals, violins humming from the corner stage, champagne flutes clinking like nervous applause. The annual corporate philanthropy gala had always been Michael's arena. He knew how to command a room, how to smile just enough, how to win without showing his teeth. Tonight, he smiled too hard. Vanessa stood beside him, flawless in a backless navy gown, her arm looped in his as photographers snapped away. But the glint in her eyes had dulled. Her laughter, when it came, was stiff, like it had been rehearsed for a different event, a different version of her life. Reporters whispered at the edge of the red carpet. "Isn't that the man from the airport?" Custody video. His mistress testified, didn't she? The mother's gone viral, again. She's doing an interview with real justice moms next week. Michael heard it all, pretended not to. Inside the ballroom, he poured Vanessa a drink, but she didn't take it. Instead, she stepped away toward the silent auction table without a word. He followed, carrying her sequined clutch and silk wrap. The cameras caught it. Camille watched from her couch, legs tucked beneath her, the live stream open on her laptop. The same gala they'd once attended together, 10 years ago. Back when Michael still reached for her hand in crowded rooms. Back when she thought love meant being chosen. Now she watched him trail behind another woman with the same careful smile, carrying another clutch, another narrative. It was the exact same posture. Same suit. Same routine. But something was off. It looked empty. Vanessa paused at the end of the room, sensing the eyes, the weight of it all. She didn't turn around fully, just enough to glance back at Michael. Their eyes met briefly, hers. Said it all. "This wasn't what I thought it would be." Michael kept smiling. Held her bag tighter. Camille muted the stream. Closed the laptop. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt released. Because the man she once knew hadn't changed. He'd just found new props. And now, the audience was beginning to see through the performance. She stood, pulled on her coat, and stepped outside into the night air. Crisp, unscripted, real. Back at the gala, the violinist played something sweeping, something tragic. Michael stood center stage, still carrying the bags, but no longer carrying the room. It was late spring when the court granted supervised visitation, a decision buried in legal paperwork. But for Camille, it felt like sunlight breaking through a sky long shut. She met Lila every Saturday at the same park. Neutral ground, wide open. Space, no walls to echo the past. Just grass, trees, and time. They sat side by side on the bench now, Lila swinging her legs, a juice box in one hand, crayon doodles scattered in her lap. Camille watched her quietly, memorizing every freckle, every question in her daughter's eyes. There had been hesitation at first. Stiff hugs, timid glances. Lila didn't call her mommy. Not yet. Camille didn't push. Instead, she told stories, not about Michael. Never about the court, just bedtime stories. About brave girls and clever mothers. About stars that remembered. Names even after clouds tried to erase them. Today, Lila had laughed out loud for the first time. "You sound like the lady who reads on the phone," she'd said between giggles. Camille smiled. "That was me." Lila tilted her head. "You were the phone voice?" "I always was," Camille whispered. "You just couldn't see me." Across the path, Camille's friend Nadia sat at a picnic table, watching from a respectful distance. When Lila ran off to the swings, Camille walked over and sat beside her. "She looks like you," Nadia said gently. "She is me," Camille replied. "The parts one forgot how to love." Nadia hesitated, then asked, "Do you think you'll ever get custody back?" Camille didn't answer right away. She watched Lila pump her legs on the swing, head tilted to the sky, hair catching the breeze. "Like a ribbon." "I don't know," Camille said at last. "But that's not the win I'm chasing anymore." She turned to her friend. Her voice was steady. "I didn't win custody. I reclaimed truth." It had taken months, court appearances, therapist testimonies, media coverage Camille never asked for but could no longer avoid. Michael had stopped fighting somewhere along the way. Or perhaps he'd just run out of performances. Vanessa had moved out quietly. No press release. No headlines. Just a series of deleted photos and a name removed from his public bio. Michael still had shared custody on paper, but he no longer carried the story. Camille did, and she carried it without anger now, just clarity. Later that day, as she and Lila walked hand in hand toward the park's exit, they passed an old, rusted gate that had been chained shut for years. Lila tugged at her sleeve. Why is that one closed? Camille looked at it for a long time. Because some paths aren't safe anymore. Will it open again? Camille squeezed her daughter's hand. I don't need it to. She knelt, brushing a curl from Lila's forehead. Some gates close so we don't go back. But others, she looked up at the open sky. Others lead us somewhere better. Lila didn't fully understand, but she nodded as they walked toward the street. Camille thought back to that day in the terminal. The cold tiles, the glances, the echoing voice of her child cutting through a lie. At the airport, she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. He tried to humiliate me. She looked down at Lila, walking beside her. But my daughter ran toward me, not away. End of story.